Well, you've served 20 years, 20 plus years in the military.
Yeah.
As a veteran, as a former U.S. Congressman, you've been on both sides of foreign affairs. Let's start talking about the most obvious problem we're facing afar today, Islamic terrorism, and what to do about ISIS.
But when I look at what has happened, it's not just these non-state, non-uniform belligerents, these unlawful enemy combatants, the Islamic jihadism, and how it has grown globally. From West Africa with Boko Haram, Al Qaeda has metastasized, and now you have Al Qaeda in Maghreb, Ansar al-Sharia, you have Al Shabaab. Then you move over into the Middle East. Of course, you've got the Muslim Brotherhood. You have Islamic Jihad, Al-Quds, Al-Aqsa Martyrs, Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS, Taliban. I mean, we can go ad nauseum ad infinitum. The first thing we have to do is to admit that that enemy does exist. And it does not just exist in these regions that are far away, but as we just have seen in Brussels, Belgium, as we have seen in Paris, France, they are within the gates, and we need to take the right type of precautions. So the first thing we need to do is see, how do we deny them sanctuaries in their bases of operation, in the places that we name, Iraq, Syria, Libya, because now, I mean, we had defeated Al Qaeda in Iraq. They have now returned and regenerated themselves as the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. And we continue to, play a game with them called JV team, refer to them as jokers. These are very serious people, and they have learned how to use the social media and websites and information technology. That's another place where we have to deny them sanctuary. I think that another key thing we have to do is cut off their flow of fighters, of material support and resource support. We've got to follow the money, and we've got to cut it off and dry it up. A key thing we have to do as part of understanding and admitting who this enemy is, we've got to win I call it the information operations war, to identify this ideology and to demonize it and really make it so that who would want to be a part of anything that is going out and killing women and children and raping them and enslaving them and crucifying and beheading people. I mean, we have got to get that message out there and really turn the tide against them. So I think that if we can start with those three critical points, it will help us on the way to defeat them. And the bottom line is you just got to crush them.
So you mentioned the Paris terror attacks last year and recently in Brussels. And it seems like Europe is facing some unfortunate consequences because of their open immigration policy. Is it truly unreasonable for the United States to want to pose a temporary ban on unvetted Muslims coming from war-torn places, like you mentioned, Iraq and Syria?
Well, this is what you want to do. You have to be very specific. And the problem is that when you throw out these very general, emotional statements, you're going to get backlash. So when you look at the flow of people that have come into Europe, the first thing you have to consider is single military-age Muslim males. Okay, if you want to, stabilize your country, you should be there fighting for your country. But when you bring these individuals in, first and foremost, that's the Trojan horse. It opens you up to have those bad elements, which we have seen in Paris and Brussels. That's how they got into Europe. This mass migration, they were passed right in, not vetted, and now we have countless amounts of cells that are there. So I think that's one of the very specific policies we need to look at. We need to look at immigration that is coming from countries that are listed on terrorist watch lists. We need to look at countries that have established Islamic terrorist groups that are operating within their borders. I think there's nothing wrong with that. You go back and look at our student visa programs. 9/11, those individuals that were here based upon student visas. And so if you are coming from a country that is on that watch list or has a terrorist group that is operating within your borders, no, we're not going to grant student visas to you. I mean, and we have a very specific reason why. And then the other thing, something that I learned about, was this fiancé visa program, which was the means by which Tashfeen Malik was able to get into this country. And the fact that we had no one that verified, as Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify, the residence that she put down on her application. If someone had done just that basic step, maybe those 14 people that were killed, 21 wounded in San Bernardino, would still be with us today.
Colonel, for a lot of years, it seems like the United States has taken on the role of being the so-called world police. Lately, there's been growing debate about the future relationship to be had between the United States and groups like NATO and the UN. What are your thoughts?
Well, one of the critical things that you've seen happen since World War II is, especially in Europe, we became the defense shield for Europe. Now, as Europe has gotten themselves their feet established and their economies back growing, they should have been taking more of a role as their security blanket. But what we have seen is that as the United States continued to be that security blanket as a part of NATO, as a part of the leading element against the Soviet Union, once the Soviet Union collapsed, we should have turned to the member nations of NATO and said, okay, enough of this spending most of your GDP on social welfare programs. You need to be standing up and defending yourselves. We should have had that transition. We cannot fully abdicate our role as a leader in the world. That's just what happens. And if you do abdicate that role and you create a vacuum, someone's going to fill that vacuum. And so we now see Russia seeking to fill that vacuum. I mean, look at the incursions that they've made in the Middle East. I mean, going into Syria, propping up Bashar al-Assad when the President of the United States of America said Assad must go. We drew this red line. Guess what? Neither one have come to fruition. And we see Iran now having more of a role. We see China having more of a role globally, especially looking at expanding their search for resources, being at minerals and also oil and gas resources. So someone's always going to step in and fill that void because, as the law of physics says, nature abhors a void. So I think that now is a time when we can look at collective security agreements such as NATO. We should look at entities such as the United Nations and say, are they viable as we move forward? But we have to take the leadership role in doing that and saying maybe there's a better way, not just abdicating our position.
Talking about Russia, what relationship should the next American president seek with Vladimir Putin?
Well, first and foremost, you have to understand that Vladimir Putin is former KGB, and so he is a tough guy. And when he said that his greatest disappointment in the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union, that should let you know something. And so when you see the incursions that have been made into seizing the Crimea, and then what they have done, positioning themselves in the Ukraine, and then also against the borders of the Baltic states, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, that comes back to him realizing that there's a gap, there's a sign of weakness, and we have not focused on our strength, which is our military. And Ronald Reagan said, peace comes through strength. Peace does not come through the perception of weakness. And I think that we have to have that military capability that is a deterrent. It's not that we're out there trying to be a bully to pick a fight, but we have to say, here are freedom's ramparts, and we're going to stand upon freedom's ramparts. And we're happy to work with you, and I think that we should be seeking how we could work with Russia, because they also have an Islamic jihadist program all along their southern areas. Chechnya is a hotbed for them. But the thing is, right now, we're not portraying that type of strength. I'll give you a great case in point. When President Obama was sitting on a stage, off-mic moment, with then Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, and he said, tell Vladimir after re-election I'll have more flexibility. You don't tell a former KGB agent that in your re-election you'll have more flexibility. Look what has happened since this 2012 election.
Let's talk about Iran and the new Iran.
We've made a horrible mistake with Iran. Iran is the number one state sponsor of Islamic terrorism. When I sit and think about 10 U.S. Navy sailors on their knees at gunpoint, and then the Secretary of State, John Kerry, thanking them for taking care of our sailors, that's not the message you send to despots, dictators, and theocrats and autocrats. The fact that Iran, who has not signed anything in reference to this deal or this agreement, and they've had countless amounts of violations already, but yet we've been releasing billions of dollars to them. Billions of dollars is going to go to make sure that Hezbollah can continue to operate, and now they're in Syria. The Quds Force, which is a listed terrorist organization, they're operating in Syria. The Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is a designated terrorist organization, those were the ones who took our sailors captive out there in the Persian Gulf. So why would we believe that something's going to change with their behavior? This is very Pavlovian. We have been rewarding them for all of this bad behavior, and we continue to get more bad behavior. Recently, toward the end of March, the Ayatollah Khamenei said that the future of Iran does not come through talks and negotiation. It comes with missiles. Well, supposedly in this nuclear deal, ballistic missiles are not supposed to be acquired, tested, or anything by Iran, as per a UN resolution, for 8 years. They've already violated that. They're looking to purchase brand new T-90 tanks from Russia. They're looking to purchase state-of-the-art fighter jets and the new S-300 surface-to-air anti-aircraft system. If they get that S-300 system, that provides them a blanket protection that it will make it really hard to strike any type of nuclear facility that they're developing.
Sometimes overlooked because everything else going on in the world is problems we face with North Korea and the threats we face from their proven to be irrational leader.
The little pudgy guy.
How do we respond to them test firing missiles and making outrageous threats against the United States?
Well, the thing is that the person that controls the leash of that rabid dog is China. And when China sees that, we're going to do whatever we want, we're going to build islands in the South China Sea, put airstrips on it, and put military fortifications on these islands. We're going to continue to do what we're doing, shorting you through our trade and other things, and these cyber attacks. So China turns over to little Kim and says, do whatever you want. We really don't care. And Kim Jong-un is working with Iran as well, not just with the ballistic missile systems, but also with nuclear development. Remember that Israel struck a facility in Syria where the North Koreans were working with the Syrians on nuclear development. So what you see happening is we started out talking about these non-state actors, the Islamic jihadists, but you have state actors out there that also realize this is an opportunity. So you have Iran, you have Russia, you have China, you have North Korea. And so the only way to respond is strengthen our economy, standing up to China, and then they will have to, eventually stand up and get North Korea under control. And we have to show to Japan, and we also have to show to South Korea that we are a willing ally.